y'all, Dixie here. Today I want to talk to you about tips I think every backpacker should know about selecting a campsite. The first tip I want to throw out is one I really think can save lives, and that is look up for widowmakers. If you're not familiar with the term, widowmakers are dead limbs that are still hanging up there in a tree waiting to fall and knock you in the head. Also look for any leaning trees and really any hazard that could be lurking above. And it's always smart to do this before you set up camp. Unfortunately, I have had to move my tent before because I didn't notice something hazardous until after I set up my tent. But once you get it ingrained in your brain, you'll learn to walk up, look around, and then make your place for the night. Never camp in a wash. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I would see these specifically in New Mexico on the CDT. It would be these channels that looked like there should be water flowing through them, but it was dry as a bone and looked like water had never seen that spot. And it can be real tempting if you're looking for flat ground and struggling otherwise to set up in that bed of that channel, especially with that loose, comfortable sand. But I've heard of instances where people do that and then it rains miles away. Like there might not be any rain forecasted for your particular location. But suddenly this flood comes washing over you and you end up drowning in the middle of the night. I know this happened to a group of Boy Scouts in the past, and there have been other instances. So as tempting as it was at times, it's really best to just not take that risk. Next tip for tenters, check the slope before you commit to the spot. You can do this if you've got a foam pad by just throwing it out on the ground you're thinking about putting your tent, lay on it, and just see, is the slope going to cause you to tent surf all night, or is it level enough that you can deal with it? Even if you've got an inflatable sleeping pad that you don't want to blow up and potentially pop, you're probably gross enough that lying on the ground to test out the site isn't beyond the imaginable. It's just surprising sometimes how deceivingly flat the ground can look until you're lying in there all set up and realize it's going to be a long night. Now, a word of caution, of course you want the perfectly flat site, but if you think that there is any chance of storming or rains that night, you do want to be sure you're not setting up in any sort of depression that's going to hold water and cause it to pool up in your tent. So having something at that point that is ever so slightly sloped so that water will run off and not join you for the night is always a good idea. My next tip is choose a site that's not too close to water when it's cold outside and not too far away in the warmer months. In the colder months, sleeping near a water source can make things feel a bit colder because of the added moisture in the air. So when it's cold outside, I prefer to dry camp, just collect my water and then hike for a ways and set up camp. In the warmer months, that added humidity might actually feel nice, and then getting to camel up and drink a lot of water while you're at camp can also help you stay hydrated when it might be hard to do so considering the higher temperatures outside. But do keep in mind that you are not supposed to camp within 200 feet of a water source. If you're camped somewhere with a nice view, especially one that you might be able to catch a sunrise or a sunset, then orient your doors in those positions. I can't tell you how wonderful it is to wake up in the morning and have paid attention to this and be able to open up my vestibule and see the sunrise from my sleeping bag. I use the Lumos app to help me figure out what times and in what direction the sun and moon will rise and set, so that's just a tip for you if you're interested. Keep in mind that in the colder months, avoiding elevation is not always the best move. I'm sure that y'all have heard the higher you go in elevation, the cooler it'll get, and while that is true, there's kind of a sweet spot because in the colder months, oftentimes in the valleys, the cold air will kind of settle down in them. So if you end up camping in a valley thinking, well, I'm at the lowest point I could be, so I don't have that colder air that's at the higher elevation, that's not always true. So I would say find that Goldilocks point where you're not up on the windy, cold peak of a mountain, but you're also not too low down in the valley. What's under you, if you're a tenter, can make a big difference in a good night's sleep or a bad night's sleep. Sleeping on something like leaves and pine straw can help add some cushion and also some insulation from the ground so you're not as cold when you sleep. And sleeping on something like dry, loose sand is really nice even without a sleeping pad. But obviously you want to make sure you're not setting up on a rock or a root that's going to be digging into your back all night long. Don't underestimate the wind blocking power of bushes. I don't know how many times I have gone to set up camp and it's been real windy and I thought, man, I'm never going to get any sleep because I'm going to have wind just whooshing through my tent all night long. But if you can find some sort of scrubby brush or a bush to set up right next to, that can really be a great windbreaker and help you get a better night's sleep. If you have a choice, it's obviously best to set up in a campsite that's already established so you're not disturbing other vegetation and creating new campsites, and that is part of the leave no trace principles. Look for signs of wildlife, things like critter paths, holes in the ground, and even food sources like bushes with berries on them. These things are best to avoid unless you like having midnight visitors. Next, checking the comments in navigational apps like Far Out or even on All Trails, there might be information about campsites, and everyone has a different idea of what is their prime real estate, whether you're a hammocker or a tenter, whether you like being around a lot of traffic, you know, other hikers, or you like something more primitive and to yourself. But people like to talk about their experiences and typically will share information with other hikers to hopefully help out the next guy coming along. So those are some resources that can probably help you out. Finally, don't stress if it's not the perfect campsite. Typically you're only there for a night and then you're moving along, and I'm that type of person that feels like sometimes we need the bad campsites to help us appreciate the good ones and to really help us appreciate our beds. All right, y'all, well, that is all I have for you on tips every backpacker should know about selecting a campsite. I have some other tips every backpacker should know type videos. So if you like this style of video and you want to learn about other topics of backpacking, feel free to click the link and watch one of these other videos. Thank y'all so much for watching. If you found this video useful, don't forget to share it with a friend, and we will see y'all next time.